and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Let's get started with a glimpse of today's highlights. The U.S. is looking to make some changes to its trade policies, which may lead to a revision of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement as well. We take a closer look at a meeting of global finance leaders where they dropped a pledge to fight trade protectionism. What does this mean for Korea? These stories and more coming right up. And we start off with movements on the market today as the benchmark Kospi has surged to record levels. To give us a brief picture of this and more, we have our Business Daily's markets contributor Choi Jin-seok joining us on the phone today. Hello, Jin-seok.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so how are things looking on today's market?
The Korean equity market continued its positive momentum during today's session. The Kospi rose by 0.5% to close at 2207.84, while the Kosdaq followed with a 0.4% uptick to close at 635.11. The Kospi surged by more than 1%, ending at 2196 yesterday, a record for 2017 and the highest since May of 2011. As concerns over the so-called Brexit, or French exit from the EU, were relieved after the first round of the presidential election, foreign investors aggressively bought shares to lift the market. During today's session, institutional investors joined this buying spree, and retail investors were the only net sellers on the Kospi market. The index surpassed 2,200 for the first time in 6 years. This comes on the back of record performance on the Nasdaq overnight that surpassed 6,000 for the first time, which also helped lift overall sentiment on the Kospi and the Kosdaq. Tech giants including Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft have been enjoying a 20% rally this year, lifting the entire Nasdaq index. Back at home, by sector, securities firms that tend to react positively to a market rally benefited the most. Many companies, including NH Investment and Securities and Meritz Securities, broke their all-time highs.
Now, as we've seen a sharp rally over the last few sessions, expectations that the Kospi will break out of its consolidation period have been surging. So what are experts saying about this?
That's right. The Kospi index rose to 2228.96 on May 3 of 2011, and it is still the highest record for the market. Since then, the market has been stuck in consolidation with very limited volatility. However, experts say this is a chance for the market to break out. There are a number of positive catalysts that could lift the Korean equity market going forward. First, political uncertainty in Europe is now expected to fade away. Expectations for business and market-friendly policies by the Donald Trump administration are still serving as a positive factor. Lastly, Q1 earnings of Kospi companies are expected to break their best records. As a result, experts see the Kospi as still having room to go higher in the first half of this year. Kim Securities says the index could reach 2,300, while Hana Financial Investment and Shinhan Financial Investment say it might surpass 2,350 before the end of this year.
But obviously, it will be a long journey upwards. So what are some of the potential risks going forward?
Exactly. Despite such high expectations, experts also say the Kospi market may go through a short-term correction going forward. For instance, Kiwoom Securities says the market could fall in Q3 due to stagnant global economic recovery, as well as issues related to the Federal Reserve's policies to raise interest rates further and potentially reduce its balance sheet. The firm says political risks in Europe might erupt any time, so investors will need to be well prepared for volatility. In this sense, U.S. President Trump's announcement on tax reforms later today will be key for global markets in the near term. According to the Wall Street Journal, Trump told his staff to lower the country's corporate tax from 35% to 15% as he pledged during his presidential campaign. This has been Choi Jin-seok for Business Daily.
Korea's export volume index last month reached its highest level since record-keeping began nearly 3 decades ago. Put simply, the volume index reflects how much the country is exporting now compared to the base year, in this case, 2010. According to the Bank of Korea, for March, the index was estimated at around 151, up nearly 5% from a year earlier. 100 represents the base year, and the previous record high was set in last December at a little over 145. The rise is mainly attributed to more exports of semiconductors and display equipment, as well as general machinery. After posting a record combined operating income last year, Korea's major refineries appear to be poised for continued growth. The country's major refineries renewed their export record for the first quarter of this year, pushing out 117 million barrels of petroleum goods. This was worth $7.45 billion, up 66% on year. Now, much of this was driven by a surge in export unit prices, which jumped from just over $40 to $63. Industry producers had been worried that THAAD retaliations from China would affect export performance, but so far that hasn't been the case. China was the largest importer of Korean petroleum goods, taking up 18% of total outbound shipments in the first quarter. As the U.S. continues to push for its America First policy when it comes to trade, it looks like Korea may get caught up in the sea of changes to come. The U.S. Commerce Secretary on Tuesday said the Trump administration is considering changes to various trade terms, including its free trade pact with Korea. Our Oh Soo-young fills us in.
Will the United States request a revision to its free trade agreement with Korea? Speaking at a White House press briefing on Tuesday local time, U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said it's a logical time to review whether any changes should be made to the so-called Chorus Agreement, as it nears its 5th year of inception. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal the same day, Ross said the U.S. administration is considering trade actions in a bid to protect homegrown companies in aluminium, semiconductors and shipbuilding, all of which are core export industries for Korea. The Commerce Secretary had last week hinted these industries, along with steel, automobiles and aircrafts, may fall under Article 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, which imposes restrictions on imports on grounds of national security. Steelmakers in China have already been targeted, with the Trump administration having launched a probe into Chinese imports, which account for some 26% of the US steel market. Along with the administration's plans to levy taxes on Canadian lumber, as mentioned by Ross on Tuesday, market watchers believe these tough measures on exports only signal the beginning of a massive overhaul in trade. Ross said that by the end of the year, the US will have completed a rewrite of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which he said hasn't functioned as well as it should. He also said the government will revive trade talks with the EU and Japan and pursue a bilateral deal with the UK. Oh Soo-young, Business Daily.
The meeting of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors, as well as the spring IMF meeting, wrapped up in Washington last weekend. In attendance was Korea's finance minister and Bank of Korea governor. And our Kim Min-ji joins us today to wrap up the meetings and take a look at what this all means for Korea. Hello, Min-ji.
Hi, Jean.
All right, so we're hearing that a notable change this year was the vague mention of trade protectionism.
You're right. Until last year, top policymakers from around the world had pledged to resist all forms of protectionism. But now with U.S. President Donald Trump at the helm, it seems that countries are refraining from getting on bad terms.
There seems to be a shift in stance. Notable in a communiqué released by the International Monetary and Financial Committee was the absence of the term protectionism. This is in contrast to its previous pledge to resist all forms of protectionism.
There is no country in the world that doesn't have any sort of proviso or restriction on trade. So instead of dwelling with what that concept means, we managed to sort of put it in a, I would say, more positive and more constructive framework. The use of the word protectionism is very ambiguous.
This comes in light of U.S. President Donald Trump's America First policies, threatening to impose tariffs on nations that don't agree to renegotiate trade agreements or create more favorable conditions for the U.S. Earlier in the week, the IMF had warned that inward-looking policies threaten global integration and the cooperative global economic order, while lifting its economic forecast for this year to 3.5%. At a meeting last month in Germany, the G20 also dropped the term, and while they didn't renew their statement this time round, finance ministers said there was a general consensus that free trade is better for the economy as a whole.
The general mood of the discussion was a broad agreement in the direction that free trade is better for global growth and better in the interest of every national economy concerned as well.
The finance ministers agreed that while the economic outlook is promising, there are still some downside risks to the global economy, such as the end of easy money policy from major central banks and geopolitical risks that could hinder growth going forward.
So it looks like the countries are very conscious of the United States, because just last year the countries had vowed to root out trade protectionism, but now they all seem to be taking a step back. So it's no surprise that this is worrying Korea, as this could become one of the major threats to the Korean economy, right?
That's right. The G20 also dropped the term to pledge to oppose trade protection in March due to opposition from the Trump administration, which says trade policy needs to benefit Americans. And Korea has also been cautious. Washington has blamed the bilateral FTA it has with Seoul for causing a deficit of roughly $30 billion in trade last year. In a recent interview with CNBC, Korea's finance minister Yoo said the government is worried about Trump's past campaign rhetoric and that Korea is doing its best to reduce its trade surplus with the U.S.
The fact that protectionism is gone from the IMF statement signals that the world is conscious of the U.S. and shows how powerful it is, making up 25% of the economy. Now, while it's important to maintain friendly ties with Washington, moves toward protectionism are dangerous. What's even more worrisome is that Japan and China have been making efforts to appeal their stance to the U.S., making visits, but Korea hasn't been able to do so due to an absence in leadership. Also, during their recent trips, Korea's finance minister and the central bank governor didn't meet with their U.S. counterparts.
So I understand that this is seen as a major threat to the Korean economy, as it could also hinder growth down the line.
Sure. Speaking to reporters on the sidelines of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting, Korea's finance minister Yoo said it stands as one of the biggest obstacles for the local economy this year. The government currently forecasts the economy to grow 2.6% this year, but that could change depending on what kind of policies the U.S. lays out. Minister Yoo also noted that Seoul's free trade deal with the U.S. could be renegotiated. But the general consensus for the economy is that it's on a path of recovery. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said that Korea's exports have picked up due to improvements in the world economy. Korea's exports have been up since last November, putting an end to nearly 2 years of decline. This has prompted global investment banks, the IMF and Korea's central bank to raise their growth outlooks for this year. But experts have warned against too much optimism.
Just looking at data, it seems the country is doing better, but it comes mostly due to strong sales in the chip and petrochemical sectors. As for the chip sector, despite big investments, it only creates a limited number of jobs, which means the effects aren't felt across the jobs market or domestic consumption as a whole.
Now, but because this recovery momentum comes on the back of increased exports for Korea, I think the rise in protectionism could spell out trouble for Korea down the line.
You're right. At this point, because the pickup in growth is solely mainly due to exports, the Korean economy is far from being in the clear. The U.S. has recently initiated an anti-dumping investigation into steel alloy rods and also indicated that it could revise the FTA and impose other trade measures in order to protect protect its aluminium, chip, and shipbuilding industries. This is why experts say once the new Korean administration takes office, it will have to step up communication with the U.S. to explain that Korean companies have been expanding into the U.S., creating jobs there, and also that it has a trade deficit with the U.S. in services. One of the other things it should consider is increasing imports from the U.S. to narrow its overall trade surplus to ensure it's not designated a currency manipulator in October.
Well, it looks like Korea needs to make more efforts on the global level to better secure an environment for growth.
That's right.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Hyundai Motors saw a drop in operating profit in the first quarter of this year. Korea's largest car maker said on Wednesday its operating profit dipped 6.8% to $1.1 billion in the first 3 months of this year, compared to the same time last year, despite an improvement in sales. The car manufacturer said this is largely due to weak sales in China, which even led to the shuttering of some factories, along with increased investments in marketing and R&D activities. Hyundai Motors says it projects uncertainty in the global auto industry to increase in the second quarter and added that it will respond to changes in the market with flexibility by strengthening fundamentals and improving management. Annual salaries at Korea's largest companies continue to rise last year. According to market tracker CEO Score, average wages at over 330 of Korea's top companies rose 2% to about $65,000. The data was extracted from financial statements submitted in 2016. Of the 12 companies that reported average salaries of about $90,000, 6 of them were petrochemical companies, including the top 2. The top 3 industries were securities at about $80,000, followed by the IT and electronics industry and the automobile and auto parts industry. In contrast to this, companies related to food and beverage and household goods had salaries to as low as about $44,000. The latest data shows that it's becoming harder for Koreans to buy homes. According to the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, the median home price nationwide was about 5.6 times higher than the median annual income last year. This means, on average, Koreans would need to save up their entire salaries for over 5.5 years to buy their own homes, making it the longest time required since related data was first compiled in 2006. In the past, this figure typically sat in the 4 to 5 year range. Homes located in the Greater Seoul area were the most expensive, at prices that neared 7 years' worth of people's annual wages. The May Golden Week is just around the corner. While employees at large companies are looking forward to a long, long holiday, those at smaller firms are not so fortunate. Our Lee Ju-young has more.
The golden holiday period in May. Starting from the first week of May, holidays are lined up like Labor Day, Buddha's birthday, and Children's Day. Add the presidential election coming up on the 9th and the 2 weekends, and in theory, workers can take a holiday spanning 11 days if they take extra days off in between. When it comes to large companies like LG and Samsung Electronics, workers are encouraged to choose their vacation days more freely, while Hanwha and Hyosung Group have made both May 2nd and 4th mandatory days off at most of their business arms. But when it comes to small and mid-sized companies, it's a different story. According to a survey conducted by Korea Federation of SMEs on 250 smaller manufacturers, 30.4% said they will not be taking any days off in between to extend their holiday. Even out of the firms that do have holiday plans, nearly 55% were only able to afford just 1 day off, with less than 10% able to let their employees rest for 3 whole days. SMEs say this is because if operations were to be temporarily suspended, they will not be able to meet tight manufacturing deadlines, and that would deal a big blow to their bottom line. Experts say the widening gap of wages and fringe benefits between small firms and big businesses is one of the leading reasons why job seekers look to big-name companies. and that government needs to provide more support for smaller companies, which are chronically short on staff. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
TV campaign ads by presidential hopefuls started airing last week, and their 60 seconds of airtime are allowed to run a maximum 30 times until the eve of Election Day. Our Oh Jung-hee has more on this fierce battleground.
Former President Roh Moo-hyun singing a Korean folk song, and his successor Lee Myung-bak trying the food at a traditional market. Past elections have shown the power of TV ads. And that's why this time too, the candidates have put together clips hoping to stand out. Moon Jae-in's ad is a montage of people from different segments of society, alongside specific pledges to address their concerns.
다들 행복의 나라로 갑시다.
지금 대한민국은 선택의 기로에 있습니다.
Hong Jun-pyo is depicted as a figure of strength who'll lead a nation surrounded geopolitically through its national security crisis. An Chul-soo's ad, by contrast, is only words and rhythm. It touts An as a tech industry innovator who's different from ordinary politicians.
미래를 여는 첫 번째 대통령 되겠습니다.
Yoo Seung-min is shown from start to finish expounding on the political philosophy behind his vision for a proper republic.
공동체를 지키는 것은 보수가 새롭게 노력해야 될 부분이라고 생각하고.
Shim Sang-jung's ad highlights her role as a leader for the common worker.
졸라맬 허리띠가 없어요. 200만 원도 못 받는 940만 노동자들. 허리띠 졸라매는 게 아니라 목 조르는 거예요.
The ads of the progressive candidates like Moon and Shim are emotional with calm but bright music, promising to improve people's lives. Yu's ad is more intellectual, while Hong and An's ads use strong rhythmic music to emphasize their will to change things.
In past elections, the ads were quite similar to each other, talking about universal virtues like trust, which actually means they didn't target anyone in particular. But this election has more strategic communication. The candidates know exactly who they want to reach and are sending their core messages right to them.
With these ads, the candidates have only a minute to reach voters, but it's clear the TV spots are already making an impression. The question now is whether the impact will be strong enough to stay with voters until Election Day. Oh Jung-hee, Business Daily.
Researchers at Ulsan National Institute of Science and Technology are currently working to develop a new type of battery using abundant and readily available seawater. Seawater batteries, which haven't been commercialized yet, are believed to become a future growth engine. Our Kim Yo-sun reports.
These coin-sized batteries produce electricity using seawater. A team of researchers led by Professor Kim Young-sik at Ulsan National Institute of Science and Technology are developing them for industrial use. Using sodium, the sixth most abundant element on Earth, these batteries are not only eco-friendly but also cost-efficient.
We're conducting research to develop seawater batteries for industrial use and commercial distribution by enhancing their power capacity.
The battery extracts sodium ions from the seawater, which react with water to generate electricity. They could be used as backup power for nuclear power plants, ships, or submarines. The researchers plan to develop a 1 kilowatt-hour battery pack within this year, and by next year, a 10 kilowatt-hour one, large enough to accommodate the daily needs of a family of 4. Once the battery is commercialized, Professor Kim says it could become a leading player in the energy storage market, known to be worth some 47 trillion won, or over $42 billion, and become a major growth engine for the country, contributing to the revitalization of the new energy sector. Kim Yo-sun, Business Daily.
And that does it for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. So don't forget to check back with us then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.